It's hard to beat a good team twice. This is a subject, a theory, a talking point that we have talked about several times over the years on this channel. Of course, most recently with Georgia and Texas having a rematch in the SEC championship game, a rematch from a game held earlier in the regular season. And I actually talked about it leading up to that game. And I kind of told you my overall philosophy on that, which is I don't believe that it's just generally hard to beat a team twice. It's hard to beat a good team once. It's hard to beat a good team. That's what makes them good. They don't lose often, so they're hard to beat. So as far as the whole it's hard to beat a team twice thing, yeah. If it's a good team, it's hard to beat a good team twice. But I was thinking about some rematches we've had over the last few years, and there's examples on both sides of the equation here. There's examples where a team has beaten a team twice. There's examples where a team has beaten a team and then lost to a team. So you've got the Georgia-Texas deal from this season. Georgia goes on the road to Austin, beats Texas in the regular season. SEC championship game, neutral site in Atlanta, Georgia versus Texas, Georgia wins. So Georgia beat them both times. Last season, we had another example of this between Oregon and Washington out in the Pac-12. They played during the regular season. Washington won. They played again in the Pac-12 championship game. Washington won again. A few years ago, 2021, Georgia and Alabama played in the SEC championship. Alabama won. But then in a rematch of the national title game, Georgia won. So, and as you continue to go back, you can find, you don't find a lot of them. Now, the reason you don't have a lot of rematches in college football is because the way college football has been set up over the last 100 years. That's changing now, and I think you're going to start to see more and more rematches in college football. You have the expanded playoff. You've got expanded conferences, right? So you're going to have without divisions. No divisions anymore. So you're going to have a lot of situations like you had this year in the SEC where Georgia and Texas play in the regular season, but then at the end of the regular season, they're the two best teams in the SEC, so they play again in the conference championship game. It looked like we were headed that direction for Ohio State and Oregon this season, right? Ohio State goes and plays Oregon in the regular season out at Oregon. They lose, and it was kind of just expected that we were going to see a rematch of that in the Big Ten title game. Ohio State, though, lost to Michigan, and Penn State got in instead. Last year, Washington and Oregon talked about that. So as we add teams to conferences and do away with divisions, you're going to have more, I think, rematches now going forward in college football than we've ever had before. You throw in the addition of the 12-team playoff, and of course, there's been a lot of people talking about the possibility of certain teams potentially playing 3 times, and I do think if we keep a 12 or more team playoff long enough, I do think eventually you'll see that. You've got a chance, I guess, to see it this season. Georgia and Texas have already played twice. They're both in the playoffs. They're on opposite sides of the bracket, though, so they would have to each make the national title game in order for there to be a third game between those two teams. The odds of that, of course, are unlikely. But you're going to start seeing this a lot more. So I guess the point of, well, I've got a couple of points really with this video. What do y'all think about the whole hard to beat a team twice thing? I know we talked about it with the Georgia-Texas game, but there's probably some people watching this video in regards to Oregon, Ohio State, or maybe didn't watch that one. So you've got Oregon and Ohio State coming up for the second time. They're going to play in the second round of the playoff on New Year's Day. That's the Rose Bowl, 5 o'clock on ESPN. Now, great game during the regular season. I thought both teams played really, really well. Oregon made one more play than Ohio State did, right? Both teams played really good. Ohio State had the ball at the end with a chance to win. Didn't work out. Really good game, really close game. Oregon had a home field advantage there that they won't have at the Rose Bowl, neutral site. But this has been happening a lot lately where Oregon wins the game against Ohio State. Now they're playing later, but Ohio State is favored. And there's a lot of people who look at that and they go, how can that be? You know, we saw them play. Oregon beat them. How can Ohio State be favored? There's a lot that goes into that. Again, because in the sort of bubble of college football, rematches are so rare or have been rare over the last 100 years of college football because of the way college football was set up. I think that has caused this idea to perpetuate that, number one, it's hard to beat a team twice, and number two, that if you beat a team once, you should be able to beat them again. If you just kind of think, though, for a few minutes about pretty much every other sport on planet Earth where you see rematches way more often than you do in college football. It's not at all unusual for a team to, team A beats team B. Then they play later on in the season or in the postseason, and team B beats team A. Like, it actually happens all the time. You want to talk about things like baseball where they play series of games. How often do you see a sweep? Like, baseball is a little different because you've got different pitchers going out there for each game. But you take basketball as an example. They play series in the postseason, and even during the regular season, there's a ton of rematches. And team A doesn't beat team B 10 out of 10 times generally in the NBA. Team B is going to win some of those games. And I think, generally speaking, college football would be the same way if teams rematched as often as they do in other sports. They just don't. So people have sort of looked at college football differently than those other sports. And I think that's helped perpetuate the whole narrative about hard to beat a team twice. And I also hear this a lot, I don't want to see rematches. We don't need to see, I don't want to see a rematch. Probably going to have to get used to seeing rematches. Again, every other sport on the planet has rematches very often. And because of the way college football is currently structured and the way it's likely to be structured going forward into the future, we are going to see rematches almost every season, probably either in a conference championship game like this year with Georgia, Texas, or in a postseason like this year with Oregon and Ohio State, who played in the regular season and are now playing again in the postseason. But there's a lot of things to take into account when a game is played, a team wins, and then those same two teams play later, and the losing team the first time is favored the second time. Again, we saw this last year with Oregon and Washington. Oregon was favored over Washington in the regular season, and Washington beat them. The rematch came up in the Pac-12 championship game, and Oregon was favored again, and people are sitting there going, why is Oregon favored? Like, they already played them and they lost. Shouldn't Washington be favored? Vegas doesn't look at it that way, of course, the ones that make these numbers and these lines and these odds. And, they understand that there are different there are different things that go into different games played at different times. Where the game is played, the overall health of a team at a given time. Some teams are playing better later in the year than they might have been playing previously when the two teams matched up. So there's a lot of things that go into that, but what do y'all think about the Ohio State-Oregon matchup in the Rose Bowl? What do you think about Ohio State being favored? Right now, they're favored by 2.5 over Oregon. Again, we did see those two teams play earlier in the year. We did see Oregon win, but it was a great game, and it was at Oregon. And Ohio State was favored in that game. So Ohio State went into the regular season game favored and lost. Now they're going into the second round playoff game and are favored. Is Oregon gonna pull like the switcheroo? Last year Oregon was favored twice and lost twice. Are they going to be the underdog twice this year and win twice? I'll give my prediction and full breakdown on the game after Christmas. Merry Christmas, by the way. It is Christmas Eve, about 4:30 in the afternoon, I guess, as I'm recording this this video. I'll be on tonight for the call-in show. We'll see how it goes if anybody wants to talk some college football on Christmas Eve. But is Oregon going to pull the switcheroo and sort of beat Ohio State twice as an underdog, just as they were beat twice as a favorite last year by Washington? So I don't put any stock into the it's hard to beat a team twice thing. It's hard to beat a good team twice. Like Vandy beating Alabama, right? It would be hard for Vandy to beat Alabama again. Not because Vandy beat them once already, but because Bama's a good team and, better than Vandy. Like, flukes happen, upsets happen, right? It's been fun to make fun of Bama for losing that game, and that game kept them out of playoff, which is hilarious for a lot of different reasons. Everybody loves laughing at the Gumps. But the reality is, if Alabama and Vandy were playing tomorrow, none of you would pick Vandy to win. I mean, you just wouldn't. You would pick Alabama to beat Vandy, just like you picked Alabama to beat Vandy the first time, just like I picked Alabama to beat Vandy the first time, and I would pick them to beat Vandy again. It wouldn't matter to me that Vandy beat Alabama 2 or 3 months ago. It's not, it's hard to beat a good team twice. It's hard to beat a good team once. It was hard for Vandy to beat Alabama once. Yeah, so it would be hard for them to beat them twice because they're good. Do you think it would be hard for Ohio State to beat Purdue twice? Purdue's a what, 1-2 win team, and they were just absolutely horrible. Do you think it would be hard for Miami to beat Florida State twice this year? No, probably not. Do you think it would be hard for whatever, fill in the blank? Do you think it would be hard for Texas to beat Mississippi State twice? No, Mississippi State's terrible. You get where I'm going with that. So I don't put a lot of stock in the hard to beat a team twice thing. It's hard to beat a good team once. Therefore, yeah, it's hard to beat them twice, 3 times, whatever. As far as this Oregon-Ohio State game goes, I guess I get it as far as Ohio State being the favorite. I mean, the reality is, I think, well, I don't know if everyone agrees with this or not. A lot of people do. I think Ohio State is probably the one team left in the playoffs that if they play at their ceiling, they can't be beat. Like, one of the things that made it so funny that they lost to Michigan is because they're just so talented everywhere. The lines of scrimmage, the wide receivers, the running backs, the DBs and the linebackers. I mean, they're just loaded everywhere, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't have been that funny that they lost to Michigan. But because they're so good is what made it funny. They played bad. It was a bad game plan. There's no sense in rehashing that. But then you turn around and look what they did to Tennessee, right? They're so talented. If they play up to their ability, I think they can beat Oregon, not because Oregon's not good. I think Oregon's great. I've had them ranked number 1 the entire season. They're undefeated. They're the only team that can say that. And they definitely have the ability to beat Ohio State. We've already seen it. But if Oregon and Ohio State both played at the very top of their potential, I think Ohio State would win the game. Now, that's not easy to do. And it's Oregon's job to prevent Ohio State from playing up to their potential by making things difficult on them, right? So I'm not suggesting that Ohio State is definitely going to beat Oregon just because I think that at the top of their potential, Ohio State would win the game. We'll see how it plays out. But it makes sense to me why the number would favor Ohio State here heading into this game. It's not a slight on Oregon. It's sort of a tip of the cap to how talented and good Ohio State is and really how good they can be. Consistently playing at that level, that's another story, and that's something that has bugged not just Ohio State this season. You look at the Nebraska game for Ohio State, they came close to losing that one. I don't think they played very good on the road at Penn State, although credit to Penn State for that. Again, they made it difficult for Ohio State to play up to their potential there, but Ohio State did not play up to their potential there. You, of course, have the Michigan disaster for Ohio State, and then you've got the Tennessee blowout. They've played really well. They've played pretty poor a couple of times, and they've played sort of good to really good the rest of the season. Oregon has been the most consistent team in the country. They've had very few off weeks. There was early in the season against Boise State, and we didn't really know what to make of that at the time. You look back at it now, and it's pretty obvious Boise State was, a pretty good team. And then Oregon had sort of the nail biter late in the year on the road at Wisconsin. But other than that, Oregon has, pretty much been on cruise control. They took care of Ohio State early in the season, kind of cruise control after that. They did have a game scheduled with Michigan that looked big at the time it was scheduled, but of course we all know what happened to Michigan this year. They just took a nosedive. Oregon's been a really good, really consistent team. Ohio State has been more up and down, more of the yo-yo effect, which we've seen over a lot of college football this year. Think about Georgia. Looked really good at times, looked really bad at times. Alabama, obviously, we've talked about. Penn State offensively has looked, like a complete mess, like they have the last 10 years at times. And then the last 2 times we saw Penn State play, in the Big Ten championship game and a loss to Oregon, and in the first round playoff game and a win over SMU, Penn State offense looked really good. Texas can't get a first down against Georgia. Texas against Georgia runs the ball 28 times for 30 yards. You're sitting there going, what's going on here? They turn around against Clemson and run for 300 yards. A lot of yo-yoing going on in college football this year. Not the case with Oregon. They've been sort of a consistently good team. You can count on Oregon week in and week out. But I do believe that if both teams were to play their best game, Ohio State probably gets to win. So it makes sense to me that they're favored here. But what do you think about the whole what they've already played? Why is Ohio State favored? Or they've already played. We don't need to see a rematch. Or they've already played, and it's hard to beat a team twice. Where do y'all kind of fall on that? Let me know. This is going to be a great game. I have a theory here, and y'all tell me if I'm right or wrong on this one. I think the winner of Oregon and Ohio State is going to end up playing for the national title. And I think the winner of Georgia Notre Dame is going to end up playing for the national title. Now, the winner of Oregon and Ohio State would have to play Texas or Arizona State in the next round. The winner of Georgia Notre Dame would have to play either Penn State or Boise State in the next round. So I guess what I'm saying here is whoever wins between Notre Dame and Georgia, I think either of those teams, Notre Dame and Georgia, could beat either Boise State or Penn State. I also believe that Ohio State or Oregon, either one, can beat Texas or Arizona State. Do y'all feel that way too? Do you feel like we're headed towards it's going to either be Ohio State, Oregon on one side of the bracket and either Georgia or Notre Dame on the other? Let me know. That's kind of how I'm looking at it right now, heading into the second round. But all right, there you go. Thoughts on Oregon, Ohio State rematch. Oregon won the first one. Somehow Ohio State's favorite in the second one. I kind of get it. Neutral site at the Rose Bowl. Ohio State, extremely talented team. Let me know what you think about it down below. Have a good morning.